In a world where hustle culture collides with wellness warnings and workplace demands keep evolving, how do we stay sharp without burning out? How do we navigate the endless stream of wellness trends while actually getting results? This is the Work and Wellness Podcast, and I'm your host, Ange Davis. Drawing from my own journey of wins, stumbles, and honest revelations, I'll be bringing you raw, unfiltered conversations with experts and inspiring guests who've been there, lived it, and found a better way. Together, we'll cut through the noise and workshop what it really means to be well in today's workplace. No more choosing between success and sanity. No more sacrificing health for achievement. Whether you're struggling with burnout, searching for purpose, or simply ready to work smarter, not harder, you're in the right place. This is real talk about real solutions for real people. Let's get into it. Hello friends, welcome to the show. Today I am super excited to have my guest, Elaine Atkinson. Elaine is a career and leadership coach and the founder of In Wonder Coaching, where she works with professionals who feel successful on the paper, but disconnected from their work and direction. And I think many of us can resonate with that in our corporate careers. With over 20 years experience in senior leadership roles, she understands the pressure of performing at a high level while questioning whether it's still working. Her work focuses on helping individuals step back, think more clearly, and get honest about what they actually want so they can make more intentional decisions about how they work and lead. Rather than encouraging reactive change, Elaine supports people to slow down and question what's driving their decisions so they can move forward with clarity and confidence. With a really thoughtful and challenging approach, she creates space for people to explore uncertainty without needing immediate answers, helping them move forward with clarity, confidence, and a stronger sense of self. And this is my experience of Elaine as well. I worked with Elaine over 10 years ago. And so I'm super excited to talk to you, Elaine, and I feel like you are going to have so many wonderful insights for the audience. So welcome and thanks for joining me.
Oh, thanks for having me, Ange. And it's so lovely to see you again.
I know, it's awesome. And it's so funny because we were just saying before we hit record that it does feel like you kind of know what's going on in each other's lives just through LinkedIn and social media. So it doesn't feel like it's been 10 years, but I'm really excited to get into this topic with you today because I think it's almost the unspoken topic that people are looking really successful on paper, but they're still feeling unfulfilled. And I think this is true for women a lot, but for men and women as well.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people build their careers in a way that looks successful from the outside. You know, on LinkedIn, it might look really successful, but it doesn't always feel that way internally. And so I want to know what you're noticing in the people that you work with when they reach the point of realizing, hold on a minute, how did I get here? And am I fulfilled?
Yeah. And that's also my own experience as well. So I'll talk about my clients, but I will bring my own experience into this because I think it's important to be honest, because many of us learn things the hard way. But I do work with a lot of people, very high performers, and they are delivering in their job. They're hitting their targets and they're trusted by their peers and their managers. So on the outside, as you said, it all looks like it's going well, they're successful. But what often people don't see is the invisible challenges that these people are experiencing underneath. And I was one of them. So things like carrying too much, saying yes when you really should be saying no, because underneath you're still trying to prove yourself. And also trying to control everything. So again, many of them aren't micromanagers, but when things go wrong, they start to tighten the reins, and sometimes when you're called a high achiever, it can be a challenge because it feels like you really have to live up to that label all the time. So it's not always a good thing.
Yeah. Absolutely. Do you know what? I resonate so much with that, Elaine, and I resonate with that in my corporate career for sure.
Yeah.
Like if you've got that label, there's like that pressure to always live up to it. And I think if you are not the high achiever, then who are you?
Exactly. And then when things aren't going well underneath, many of the people I work with will say, well, look, it's me. I'm doing it wrong. So what do? They push harder because that's worked before. You know, when they've had a challenge before, they just push through, they work harder. But then what happens is the pressure just keeps building and then it gets harder to sustain.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and do you think that that's when people burn out? Like, is that what you're seeing? That people, at what point are people coming to you? Is it when they have already burnt out, or there's a moment when they realize that something doesn't feel right?
Well, it's different for everyone, but
Mm,
often it starts with something quite small or subtle. You know, that
mm,
feeling that something isn't quite right. So
yeah.
I had this experience before, you know, it didn't feel quite right, but you maybe put it down to, oh, it's just a busy period. It'll
Mm,
pass. But then I noticed, for example, when I woke up in the morning, I was struggling to sleep. And then I woke up in the morning and I still felt tired, even
mm.
though I would have had my 8 hours, which I always try and aim to have, never achieve. But it was happening regularly. And then I thought to myself, oh, if I can just get through today, if I can just get through today. So I think these are things that people often ignore, but it's not because they don't feel it or sense it. It's often just safer to ignore it because trying to contemplate actually something's wrong here after years of me striving in this career, that's scary to admit.
Absolutely. And I think, well, I guess the question for you on that, I'd love to dive deeper into this. Do you think it's scary to admit for themselves, or because they feel like if they admit it, that they won't be supported by their work?
I think it's a couple of things. From a work perspective, we've talked about that already. If you're a high performer, it does set that expectation to always deliver. And then you also create those standards for yourself internally. So when you don't hit them, I think that is hard to admit, particularly if work has become your identity. You know, what you do is who you are. But I think, and there is pressure in organizations sometimes to deliver. I mean, the whole system and the structure is set up around performance ratings and getting to the next level. So it's reinforced around you as well. So I think it's both. It's an internal voice and an external system that reinforces it.
Yeah, I think that's a really fair assessment. And we can't always control the external system, right? Because that is the construct of workplaces. But I do want to touch on what you said about sort of our work becoming our identity. And I think that is true for many people. I even reflect, when Liam and I were overseas last year, we did a walking food tour. And they said, "What do you do for work?" And I said it. And at the end, I said to Liam, "But I wish I said, actually, my work is the least interesting thing about me, but what we really love is X, Y, and Z." But we are so defined by our work. And I want to know, what does it look like when you see in your clients or when you speak to people day to day when their work is the center of their identity? And what does it cost people over time?
Yeah, I think when it is the center of your identity, any threat can feel personal to you. It creates an urgency sometimes that's really hard to switch off. So what do? You work longer and longer hours. Like I said earlier, you might take on too much. Instead of pushing back or even challenging, should we even be doing this work? And then what happens is you put the pressure down onto your team. And then if your team are struggling to deliver, you swoop in and you try and fix things for them. So you're creating this problem. And then because you're the one who delivers, people keep giving you work.
Yeah.
And you think, oh, I
Performance
must be doing
punishment.
well. Well, I must be doing well because people keep giving me work. Now, it might not always be the sort of work that you want to do. And then what happens? Your team rely on you too much. And then what happens as well? The exercise, the sleep, the diet, all those things start to slip, but then they really start to slip. And for me, then when you start at this stage to get feedback, well, no, it might be constructive, it might be helpful, it stings so much because you're thinking, I'm already giving all that I've got at the expense of my personal life. And you're telling me now I need to do more.
Yeah.
So it's
That's
hard.
hard. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really hard to hear. How do you suggest that people uncouple their identity from their work?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I think when it comes to your work, I talk a lot with my clients about career success is an inside job. And I think when you start climbing the corporate career, you focus a lot on titles or promotions or what other people tell you should want in your career and external definitions of success. And when your confidence comes from those things, what happens when they're not working or you don't get that promotion or the project goes wrong? And that sense of who you are and your confidence, it can just fold, like a house of cards. So I think it's really important for people, yes, to know what their skills and their talents are and align that to the work that they're doing. But if they are striving, they're striving based on what's important to them and also what they value. And I use this analogy with my clients a lot about the cake and the icing. You want your sense of self and your sense of value to come from the inside out, where you have that self belief and trust in yourself. And that's the cake. And, throughout our career, you build the layers, right? And then any recognition from others is wonderful, but that's the icing. You don't need it to know that you're achieving in your own way, or you're doing a great job, or you're on purpose with what gives you meaning. But as I said, when the opposite is true, that really can leave people feeling quite shaky. And I experienced this myself. But it's not one or the other. You can't be in the corporate world in an organization and achieve and still have a really good sense of who you are. And I actually think when you can strike that balance, you're more successful and it's more sustainable.
I agree with you, Elaine. I don't think it needs to be one at the expense of the other. I think it can be both. How do you suggest people build the strength or the layers of their cake, as you put it, so that internal resolve? Because I think often the corporate construct, and don't get me wrong, I loved my time in corporate, right? I
Yeah,
feel like there's a real benefit. I'm not someone who's like anti-corporate at all. I think we can thrive in
yeah,
those environments. But I do
yeah,
think it's geared around that external validation, promotion, and system. So, how do we
yeah.
build our internal resolve or the layers of the cake so that it's stronger than just the icing?
I think it's really important to step back regularly and also really understand who you are and what matters to you. And I know that sounds very simple, but we often don't slow down in general in life, and particularly not in the corporate world in a busy job. I work with lots of clients whose diaries are back to back, full of meetings, the inbox that never ends, and they really struggle to actually take a step back, have focus time, and protect that. Now, some of that work I believe should be focused on, well, who am I? What are my strengths and talents? And when I'm doing a good job, banking the evidence for yourself and staying in that a little bit longer than moving on to the next thing. Because you're starting to build that layer. Okay, this is what I'm good at. And that's also a good compass for you to say, when I'm taking on more work or I'm looking at more projects, try and find things where I'm using my talents in the right way. And then the
Mm.
things you're not so good at, delegate those or give those opportunities to someone else. So I think it starts with understanding who you are. But then it's also about turning that lens on to the people that you work with. Who are the people, your manager, your teams, the people in the organization that you need to build good relationships with to increase your contribution, but knowing as well that what they value is different to what you value. And then how do you bridge that gap and build those skills? Because I think we are all wired for belonging and connection. So it's not about, well, I know who I am and it's all about my cake. It's then bridging that gap between you and other people. And you and I talked before about well-being. Again, I have learned the hard way. This is really critical, making sure that your exercise, your sleep, and eating well, and I follow the 80-20 rule there, is a non-negotiable. And I've really learned this since starting my own business that you have to prioritize those things to help reset your energy so that you can go again. And I think I only realized the importance of this in the last maybe 3 or 4 years, that it's not selfish to do that. It actually increases your performance, but it's easier said than done.
For sure. I mean, I say simple, not easy often with those things,
Love
right?
that.
Like they're simple, but they're not easy, but they do create much more self sustaining performance. I always
Yeah.
say too, it makes your nervous system better regulated, which means you're making better decisions as
Yeah.
well, and you're better able to pause and get to know yourself. But I do know that sometimes when people are feeling like, their work's the center of their identity, maybe they've got some tough feedback because they're doing exactly sort of what you said, going down that cycle. The response is often to change jobs, right? Because they're like,
Yeah.
okay, well, I'm just not in the right environment, or
Yeah.
I just don't have the right leader. And that's really what the problem is. But that often doesn't solve the problem. So I'd love your take on that and sort of what your thoughts are around that approach as opposed to looking within.
Yeah. And the reason that doesn't often work when you move jobs is because you're the common denominator.
It's that old saying, everywhere I look, there I am.
Love that. And, I've worked with clients, in a job that they weren't happy in. They moved to another organization. It was a smaller one. They were working closely with the senior leaders. The culture felt right. All the things that was missing in the previous role. Then, and it feels good straight away. It's a fresh start, new people, new experiences. But then slowly what happens, they start to default to the old patterns. So they overwork. When there's conflict, they try and avoid it and please people, or they dismiss it as in, oh, well, they just don't know what they're doing. It's not
Yeah.
me. Yeah. And then what happens, each move feels like it should fix things, but it doesn't. And it chips away at your confidence then and your sense of judgment, saying, well, this didn't work out. I'm now in this organization and this doesn't work out. And then you think, well, what am I going to do now? The problem's me.
And it's interesting because, I mean, in some ways, in the nicest possible way, the problem is me, right? Like, because it's about, in a sense, not knowing what is fulfilling in the type of work and the way that we work. So I
Yeah.
guess because these decisions do really have a lot riding on them, right? Like often financially, career wise, socially, how do you help people see, I guess I'm going to say in the nicest possible way, that sometimes the problem is them or there's an opportunity. And I don't mean the problem in terms of the system and the bigger system, right? But in terms of them
Yeah.
having the self-awareness to know what their rich life is, how they really want to work, what their superpowers are. How do you
Yeah.
get people to open their eyes to that when they might have worked in a corporate environment like us for 20 years or a- that's a big thing to sort of face for people. How do you get them to do that?
Well, and it is interesting because the problem is me, but it's not necessarily you personally.
Yeah.
It's how you're thinking and what you're doing. And
Yes.
that's probably the first place I start with my clients is when things aren't going right or strategies you've used to this stage in your career aren't helping you. It's separating it from who you are as a person. Your unique traits and who you are with your family, the values, the things that matter to you in life, they're there and they're all part of who you are. So I probably separate that part of individuals first of all. So they get a really good sense of, and it might be through their own self assessment or looking back at the feedback that they've received. Again, back to that evidence and going, right, yeah, this is who I am as a person. Then when I'm in the work environment, how do I then show up? And is it in ways that help me and is aligned with who I am? And then it's starting to get them to look at their thinking and these patterns that they repeat again and again and again, some of which work that they might want to keep, but some of which they want to change or they need to change if they want to get a different outcome. And it's really testing their assumptions or the beliefs and I don't know, what's got them here might not necessarily get them there. And it's okay to change and evolve. And
Yes.
each role that you go into, certainly as you climb the corporate ladder, needs different skills or needs a different approach. And it's being agile enough and flexible enough to do that, but knowing that you can. And again, one of the really good things I often do with clients is get them to look back and say, when have you faced a similar experience before? And they'll say, not exactly, not exactly. And I said, yeah, but something similar. It could be in your personal life. You start to realize, actually, I have the tools or I have this within me. I just wasn't conscious of it because we're all often on autopilot doing what we've always done.
Yeah, I call them proof points. I always think, what are my proof points that I've done it
Yeah.
before or that I can do it moving forward? I want to know, I guess I feel like there's this conversation a lot about sort of people get to the point in their career where they've worked really hard and then they get to the point and they think, oh God, I'm exhausted or I'm on the verge of burnout or I don't know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Do you think it's possible to get to that point mentally and not have to go through all of that? Do you know what I mean? Or is that just kind of the way work is set up and we have to hustle and work hard, get to the point of realizing, oh dear, maybe we haven't done this right, and then make a change? Or do you think for people who are early in their careers, there are some things that they can do early on so that they're clear working through their career path and they don't end up burnt out?
I think the world of work is definitely changing. And
Mm,
that sense of going into a job for life, or even, I must stay in this role for at least 5 years for it to look good on my CV, that's all shifted and changed now. So I
mm,
think there is a different opportunity for people to think about their careers differently. I felt for a long time personally that my career was leading me rather than the other way around. And again, we have this narrow view that it's a ladder and you climb the ladder and you get to the next level and that equals success. When I work with my clients a lot now, and it's also been driven by my own experience, I get them to think about their career more as a map. And visualize them standing with a map in front of them. And they're the navigator, and their career may have multiple routes because I really feel we have multiple careers within us.
yeah,
And there will be some detours, there'll be some pit stops, and there will be some dead ends.
yeah,
But if you're the navigator, right, and you remember who you are and what your skills and your talents are, you can navigate that map. And it doesn't have to be this sort of very narrow ladder where often, there's no room to fall on ladder. There's no room to move around except fall. Love that quote from Matt Haig. Or what happens if that ladder's up against the wrong wall? You see how restrictive that is as a metaphor? But if you think about it as a map and you own your career and you always have agency around that, I think that'll lead to better outcomes for everyone. And you don't have to be young to adopt this mindset because often when you're older, you and I talked about running our own businesses. I've started to do that in my 40s, but I'm not starting from scratch. Every day I'm using some of the skills and the experience that I gained over the course of my career.
mm,
But I'm not proving in the wrong direction anymore. I'm more aligned with what's important to me. And I'm using those strengths and those skills and those talents and linking that to what matters to me. I'm still working hard. I still
yeah.
have a fire in my belly. I'm still ambitious at this age as well. But I have a different perspective around what success is. And I think anyone can do that.
Yeah, I've not heard sort of the map and navigator analogy before. And I think it's such a wonderful analogy because, like you said, if a ladder is up against the wrong wall or you make a wrong step on a ladder, you fall like to the ground. But on a
Yeah.
map, you can make a U-turn and go in another direction and choose a different way to get there. And I think it's sort of, it stops it from feeling like it's so finite or that if one wrong decision is made in a career that well, that's it. It's all over because sometimes we do make decisions with the information we have at the time in our career and take on a role, and it might not have been the best decision. I think there's a learning and a gift in every situation, but I think that
Yeah.
sort of opens it up a little bit. Do you
Yeah.
have a moment in your career where you felt like you thought it was really pivotal for you, or like maybe you made a wrong decision, or where you felt a little bit stuck?
I once left a role with nothing to go to.
Mm,
And I think I was weary, probably from some of the bad habits and patterns I'd picked up, even though I was successful. But I think I was weary from all of the change and transformation. And I got to the point where I decided I couldn't do it anymore. And I left with nothing to go to. And that was a scary prospect at the time. But also at the same time, I knew it was right. And I'd considered it as part of my broader life decisions and thought, right, I can do this. But then straight away, there was that discomfort of not knowing for the first time in my career what I was going to do next. There was no next rung on the ladder. And that was scary. But at the same time, it was the right choice, but it's not something I recommend to everyone. I think, as I said earlier, we should be proactive around our careers. We should have agency around them and always thinking about what is the next route on that map for me. Because when I was in that situation, I found myself, I hadn't done the work yet on what I really wanted. So I was confused by the options. There were all these jobs being presented, or I was looking at them and going, well, maybe that could work. Maybe this could work. And then I started to compromise. Well, I couldn't possibly ask for that, or I wouldn't be able to do that. So it was a confusing place to be. And this is where I think I learned this approach that I now use with my clients is to take a step back, do the inventory of your strengths, your skills, what you're good at, what other people have said about you, but also define what you really want in the next role and what are your non-negotiables. And then almost practice. I hate this phrase, but it's a good phrase, your value proposition.
Yeah.
Here's what I offer. Here's what I bring. If you hire me, this is what I can do. This is where I can contribute. And I got so confident at describing that again and again and again with practice that that confidence then started to become contagious. And
Yeah.
the conversations I was having with recruiters and with companies started to shift. And then my confidence started to grow as well, inner confidence that I've got this. I
Yeah.
know what I want. It might not come straight away. So again, you have to sit with that discomfort and be okay with that. But now I've been through that experience. I wouldn't be as worried about doing that again. In fact, I wasn't. I consciously chose to leave my corporate job to set up my own business. But it's a great experience to go through. And I call it the career blueprint. If you have a blueprint, you know who you are and what you want. Every opportunity you consider gets matched against this. And if you are compromising, it's done in a very intentional way.
That is so important, Elaine, because what I have often seen, and this is really just through friends and people I've worked with, is people work themselves to the bone and then they're pushed by something they're not enjoying rather than pulled by the next opportunity. So they're like, I'm moving because I can't do this anymore because I'm burnt out and I'm over it. And then
Yeah.
they don't necessarily think exactly like you said about, okay, what is my blueprint? What are my sort of, non-negotiables? What are the things that I want to do? Because they're just like, well, I'll just do anything. I can do anything. And so I can do that job. So I'm just going to do it. And then it sort of becomes a little bit of a vicious cycle. Then you do it for a bit, you get pushed by something you hate again. Do you see that in your clients as well?
Yeah, I often say to them, just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Yeah.
But again, we can get distracted by sort of these shiny things and they look good on paper. But that's why I really encourage my clients to slow down
Yeah.
and really think things through. Which again, something I had to learn because I used to think being decisive and making decisions quickly was a real strength. And it is in some respects. But it's also perhaps because you're uncomfortable with the uncertainty and not knowing or trusting that if you turn this opportunity down or you say no to this, that something else won't come along afterwards. So it's that balance.
Yeah, and it does take those proof points though to trust, don't you think, Elaine? Like I think you've got to have the past proof points for you to feel like you can trust that those things will come along again. Otherwise, it's quite hard to do.
Yeah, it is. But I think that's really important I also talk to my clients about measuring the gains, not the gaps. And again, I've borrowed
Mm.
that from a book that I read a few years ago. And, as I said, it's still have an aspiration, think about the vision of your career and your life in 10, 15 years time. And it doesn't have to be all mapped out in a huge amount of detail, but I really do encourage them to do that, have that aspiration and ambition. But then look at, well, how far have you come? What are the gains that you've made so far? Those experiences, those skills, and keep measuring those week on week or month on month, year on year. Because if you focus on the gaps, you're always in deficit, like credit in the bank, when you're always in the red,
Yeah.
that's what it feels like. You're always struggling or you're always trying to get back into the black. Just keep yourself in the black all of the time. And also then when the challenges come, it's not shaking you as much because you're like, well, I've got this. And I have the
Yeah.
evidence, I've been here before, or I've been in a similar situation before and I can overcome it. So
For
it really comes
sure.
back to self-belief and self-trust.
Yeah. And, it's funny because I think, our brains are always trying to keep us safe. But what that means is it's looking for danger all of the
Yeah.
time. And so it's always looking for the gaps, not the gains. And so we've really got to override that and proactively, even if it's every day, writing those gains to remind ourselves because our brain will always look for the gaps.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so
Yeah,
true.
it's super interesting. I think, it takes a lot of self work to be able to do that. Is there one
Yeah.
exercise or anything that you use with your clients, particularly that you just think like, this is the one thing that I would start you with to get that strong level of self awareness or self trust?
Well, if I bring it back to if you're in a role and you're not happy and you feel something is off. And also, I want to make it clear, I'm not advocating that people just leave their jobs. But if you are in a role and it's something is off and you realize it isn't just a one-off thing, this has been happening for a while, have a look at the job and do an assessment around, is it the role itself? Okay. This, it's not for me anymore. And I'm clear on that. Or is it how the role is shaped and being set up? Or is it the organization doesn't align with your values and there's too much of a compromise there? So I would look, first of all, at those things to see, well, actually, if I showed up differently in this organization or learned some different skills, this place would be great. And a lot of the things that are wrong are in my control to change, fix, or influence. And that's often where I would start. But if you conclude after that, well, I have learned some new skills, I've shifted my mindset, and I've still concluded that this isn't the right place for me, then again, it doesn't have to be this sort of big leap or decision to move tomorrow. Again, because you said when you're resisting something or you're trying to escape something, that pressure can lead you to make bad decisions. It's then saying, well, what am I good at? Going out and having conversations with your network and using your network before you really need it.
Yeah.
Building it and exploring different opportunities. I use that word a lot with my clients. Explore, see what's out there and what might fit. And then, once you've got this sort of bigger view, you can narrow it down. But we often jump to, well, I do this, so I need to go and get that role. And again, that limits the options instead of thinking a bit more. And
Mm,
then from that, those conversations can turn into opportunities. And yes, you need to do the work around your CV and LinkedIn. Those things are important as well. But I think if it starts with that internal view, sense check it really is the wrong role in an organization. And then if it is, go out there and find the next route on your map.
yes. Without having to make a big dramatic change. Because I think sometimes we think, well, we've just got to go and jump. But doing what you said is, I think, wonderful advice because it still feels like you're then moving towards that direction, the next route on your map, the next thing you want to get to. You're still taking action towards it. So hopefully it makes people feel less stuck without feeling like they've just got to blow up their whole life and leave their job immediately.
Yeah. And I don't feel you have to blow up everything. I think it's really just taking a step back. And as I said, recognizing you're not starting from scratch, as I said earlier.
It's retraining the way that we work, though, isn't it? Because similar to you, I feel like, in my career, I was taught immediate decisive action is rewarded, move fast, etc. And then it's funny because, Liam was in the military and they have this saying and he always thinks it's so cheesy, but slow is smooth, smooth is fast. And I think it's interesting in that sense because I do feel like it's a little bit like that. When I was at Combank, the CEO at the time used to say we need to slow down to speed up. And I used to think, what on earth is he talking? Like at the time, I was a new leader and I was like, what does he mean slow down to speed up? This just sounds like some weird jargon. And now I understand that the
Yeah.
more that we slow down, we're able to move faster when we make a decision rather than moving fast in the wrong direction.
Yeah, and also when you slow down, I've noticed you become more creative, or there's different ideas that you allow space to come in that you hadn't even considered before. And I'm constantly amazed at this now, even myself as a business owner, because again, you can run very hot. You can take those old ways of working from the corporate world, you can bring them into your business. But I've really been amazed at the power of slowing down, allowing those different ideas and creativity to be unleashed. And then again, it opens up possibilities and options that you'd never thought about. And I think that serves you really well in the corporate world. But for some reason, we don't protect that time and space because we see our value through doing.
thinking and not being. And I think it's interesting because I reflect on my time in corporate and it was very glamorized to get into a lift and be like, how are you? Busy? I'm so busy. I didn't even have time to go to the bathroom today. I didn't have time to go to lunch today. And I think, gosh, I would love to walk into a lift and people be like, you know what? I just had an hour of really spacious thinking and I've solved multiple problems off the back of that. Like, I'd love to hear that conversation now. Because similar to you,
Yeah.
I've really realized I did a podcast this week on it actually, the benefit of space and being able to have that space to think, to be creative, to problem solve. And, this might sound a bit woo woo, but I think the more space you create, the more opportunities are allowed in.
I believe that, and I've experienced that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. Although Albert Einstein said everything is energy. So I think, there's science behind it somewhere there. But I think it's really sage advice to sort of slow down and really create that space and be intentional. I guess if
Yeah.
someone's in a space right now where they're feeling like that person we talked about at the start, where they are working really hard on their LinkedIn and on their CV, they look really successful, but they're feeling like something's just not right. I'm not fulfilled. I'm not enjoying it. What are the first few things that they should be stopping and doing? And I know we've sort of covered a little bit about this throughout, but if there was, maybe two or three things that you would say, if you're in that space right now, here are some things you should go away and do immediately that will help you take the next route on that map.
Look, I think it is just following on from what you talked about, space. I think it is taking some space. So it's either taking a day off if you can, and I would encourage people to get away from the office, away from their desk, go outside in nature, go to a coffee shop, bring a book with you. I can't believe I'm saying this because for years I resisted journaling, right? There's something different when you write down what's going on for you. There's less editing, less filtering when you're typing. It allows more space for creativity to come in. But maybe first start with noticing the patterns. What are the things that you are doing now that aren't, how do you feel now? And what are the things that you're doing now that aren't helping you? So I
I
think
think
that's
that's
really
important.
important to do. When do I overwork? When do I take something on that I shouldn't or avoid a conversation? And then write down what do I think is driving that? Right? Because often they'll get into this piece around fear or somehow that they don't feel good enough. Right?
Yeah.
So I would spend some time on that. And then a lot of these people have an amazing analytical skills, analysis skills, because when you're in the corporate world, you need to. Then look for the evidence. What evidence of what they're saying to themselves that they're not good enough is actually true?
Mm,
And then I love this question, which you see many times on social media and LinkedIn, like, what would you do if you couldn't fail?
yeah.
And just start to open that window a little bit, do a bit of that self-discovery. But I really think it's as simple as that. I could give you 10-point plans, but it's not, when you talked about simplicity at the beginning, it is really as simple as that, is starting to open the window and getting to know yourself a little bit better and
Mm,
separate from fiction. What's real or what are you imagining in your heads
yes.
going on?
Yes. Or even facts and feelings. I love that activity is
Yeah.
separating what's a fact and what's a feeling. Both are valid, but they should have different weight in your decision making.
Yeah, and your feelings. I do a lot of work with my clients around their feelings and their emotions. Again, we're
Mm,
told to, suppress those and keep yourself in control. A lot of people say, well, I'm not emotional, but your emotions are just pointing to unmet needs
yeah.
or things, your values that you're not living. So pay attention to your emotions. Don't judge them. Try and label them for yourself and go, what is it that I'm actually feeling? And what could this mean?
Yeah.
That's a normal part of being human to have those emotions. And actually, the more you feel them and understand them, the healthier it is then, and you make better choices rather than trying to suppress them. Because that's the sort of thing, if you don't look at, does lead to things like burnout. So I think
Absolutely.
awareness is usually where the first shift happens. And and that's when the change starts.
Yeah. And I also think too, awareness means that the next decision you make is going to be more in alignment with yourself and what you actually want to achieve, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I
You
love
do
that.
have to take action.
Yeah, of course. Of course. I say in my workshops, Elaine, it doesn't matter what you know, it matters what you do. So I can tell you everything, but if you don't go
Yeah.
away and do anything. It's just an interesting presentation.
It's absolutely true. I often say it's like psychological entertainment for you, this awareness, but you have
Yeah.
to act. And then the confidence comes and the self-belief comes when you act. And
Yeah.
again, it only needs to be a small step and then another small step. No big leaps required.
Yeah. Absolutely. I love that you say you resisted journaling, but you're now a huge advocate for it. And it does allow you to really tap into your emotions, what you're thinking, because otherwise I certainly can over intellectualize things if I leave them in my head. But when you write it down and then you read it back, you can sort of look and be like, oh, well, that's actually just ridiculous. You know, when you read it back, but when it's in your head, it doesn't feel ridiculous.
No, and often when you read it, you think, goodness, that's harsh.
Yeah.
And I'm walking around with all of those thoughts. And again, those are experienced by your body as well. The aches and pains, it's all connected. And it gives you distance, I think, when you write it down and an opportunity to say, well, do I want to choose to carry those thoughts around with me or do I want to choose something different?
Mm,
Powerful. But as I said, it took me a while to get to that again, because the old ways, the old patterns, they're nice, safe, and familiar, but they're not going to get you sometimes to where you want to be.
Yeah, it's so true. I've loved this chat so much, Elaine. I feel like we've covered so much ground. Is there a question that I haven't asked you that you wish I had, or anything that you want to share?
Question that you haven't asked me. That's a great question. Can't think of anything. I think what would be my key message from this is take the time to understand yourself. I just think that is so important. Because when I did that on my own terms, and as I said, started building my own cake, everything started to shift for me. And it doesn't mean to say it's easy or there are no challenges, but I certainly can bounce back quicker from the challenges and take more risks in my career now, push myself out of my comfort zone because I feel I'm more aligned and on purpose. And that only comes when you look inside first.
That is a beautiful sentiment to leave us on, Elaine, today. And I think it is so pertinent, so true. Where can everybody find you on social media, LinkedIn, etc.?
Yeah, so you can follow me on LinkedIn. I write very honestly about work, about leadership. I also run a career clarity workshop every month. So if anyone is feeling like there's something's not quite right, it's 90 minutes and it's a space, it's free. You can come along for mid sort of senior career professionals to come along and just reflect, do what basically I've said on the podcast today. Give yourself 90 minutes to reflect about what isn't working, what you want. And I do encourage people to take one small step at the end of that. So again, it's some thinking, but there is a little bit of action to take at the end. And I also offer one-to-one coaching with people to really get clear, build their own confidence and stay in their current role and lead differently, or help them make the move that they probably know they need to make, but they haven't had the confidence yet to act on it.
I think that's wonderful. And we'll put your links to all of that in the show notes so that everyone can connect. I highly recommend if you're at that point in your career, you connect with Elaine because she's wonderful. You're a wonderful leader when I worked with you in the corporate space. And I think you've just offered so much wisdom today. So thank you so much for joining. I really appreciate it. It's been so nice to chat with you.
And it's been an absolute pleasure and also wonderful to see how well you have done in your career and the wonderful things you're doing in your own business. So I would encourage everyone to follow you too and the podcast. It's great.
Thank you, Elaine. I appreciate it. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Ange. Bye.
Thanks for joining me on Work and Wellness. If today's episode resonated with you, remember, someone in your network might need to hear this too. Share it with a colleague or friend who could use these insights. I'd love to keep the conversation going, so find us on Instagram at Mind Your Grit, where we share daily tips and continue these discussions. And if you found value in today's episode, please take time to rate and review the show. It makes such a huge difference and helps other people discover conversations they might really need. Don't forget to hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. Each week, we're building a community of people who believe that success and well-being go hand in hand. You can find the notes, resources, and links from today's episode at mindyourgrit.com. This is Work and Wellness with Ange Davis. Your work matters, Your wellness matters, and this is where it all comes together. See you next week.